Hannah Wallace and welcome to FinextraTV. Calling into our virtual studio today is Ainsley Ward, Vice President at CGI and Global Business Development Lead for CGI's Payment Solutions. So Ainsley, welcome back. It's good to have you on, although virtually this time.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you on. So yes, today we're looking at the changing face of how payment systems are being deployed. And I think it's safe to say cloud-based deployments are at the top of the agenda and an increasingly growing topic of discussion, aren't they? But that's really where I want to start. Can you tell us a bit about why? What does this approach change for the banks? What about that?
Well, it's relatively simple to port any application now to a cloud-based platform, a cloud-based being hosted elsewhere in a flexible environment. But really, the net benefits only come out of that when it is part of an overall modernization program. So the application rationalization, the improvement of agile practices, putting in DevSecOps pipelines, moving towards lean IT and operational processes. So that's where banks really start to see the benefits and why many of them are choosing to go in that direction as part of their modernization program.
All right, thank you for setting the scene there. And I think since Swift announced that cloud-based payment systems could be deployed for their network back in Sibos in 2019, which I think is where we last spoke, there only seemed to be a handful of banks adopting this approach globally, which is quite interesting. So could you shed some light on why you think that is?
Well, I think that while many of the technology teams are well versed with cloud technologies and the benefits they can bring, there are others throughout the rest of the bank that tend not to be. So there is a big knowledge gap between those that know and those that don't. And really closing that knowledge gap, giving a better understanding of the benefits that can be derived, and removing some of the reticence to put core payments platforms and the like into the cloud can really make a big difference.
All right, okay, that's interesting. So, all right, what's your advice then? So how do you think banks risk assessments then? How do you think they change when looking at the cloud? And also, what are some of the security considerations that are needed when it comes to putting these solutions into the cloud? What's your advice there?
Well, banks have been outsourcing payment systems, particularly cards payment systems, to hosted vendors and to fully outsourced processes for a long time. So they have a lot of the risk assessment processes in place. But one of the things they need to do is update those to look at the potential pieces around the cloud and that sort of deployment. But also the vendors in this space, those that are looking to support cloud delivered platforms, really need to engage a wider selection of people across the bank. So bringing in the chief risk officer, having a good conversation about how risk can be managed and mitigated in what's a relatively new and unknown environment. And have that conversation with the operational and technology people within the bank to make sure that they're aligned to that. In the US, there's a number of the regulators are now starting to view cloud deployment as a traditional hosted environment. So where you would ship your systems off to a hosting provider, they're seeing that because cloud essentially is a traditional hosted environment, but with greater flexibility. You don't have a dedicated server that belongs to you. You have space on a wider range of data within the system. So because it's such a variable environment, it means that your approach that has to go hand in hand with an evolving security approach. And it's that addition of all the layers, the creation of a security environment that's fit for purpose, really starting to put in the right tools to make that work. And having all of the processes in place to ensure that you've got a full secure environment. And that starts with your vendor. It starts with the development of the platform using secure coding methods, making sure that the code is checked for vulnerabilities to make sure that you've got all the pieces in place with your DevSecOps pipeline. You need to put the platform out with a principle of limited access and use the tools that are in place to really help to guide that delivery.
All right, so you've laid out the steps there, some good advice as well. And you also mentioned limiting access. So how else does data access change with cloud adoption? And also, what sort of compliance challenges do you think banks need to take into account moving forward then?
Well, I think a lot of the key principles around data access are those that we should be deploying everywhere. So those ideas of least privilege access. So you only give people access to the data they need to do the job they need to do. and you only give the access to the data for the time that they need to do that job. So it's about better management of data access within an organization. Now, many banks are doing this well already on their homegrown systems, on their on-prem, on their hosted environments. But when they move to cloud, some of those principles do tend to go out of the well. So it's about really driving forward those kind of principles, and it's just getting access to the data for the job you need to do and nothing more. Now, from a compliance perspective, some of that is harder because the regulators are still learning themselves. I mean, that gap that exists in knowledge within organizations exists within regulators as well. So they are on the same journey that we're all on. This has been technology that's been sort of 2017 onwards, became into payments in 2019. Our first deployments in the cloud were in 2019. So we have been on that learning curve with some of the regulators as we've got our clients live in that space. But a lot of it's about having the conversation. So reaching out up front ahead of your project, checking with the regulators, taking the regulators along that learning journey as you are learning, and having them be part of your program so that it doesn't come as a shock when you say, please certify my cloud-based payments environment. That just generally doesn't work with any of the things that you're trying to do that are new. But you've also got to get your whole organization behind you, because if anybody in your bank is saying, we don't want to do this, the regulators will pick up on that and they'll use that as a lever not to approve your deployment. So having those conversations with the chief risk officer, having those conversations between ops and technology are really, really important. So you have a unified view within your organization. And don't forget the chief risk officer. Did I mention that?
Some extremely very good advice weaved in there, as I said, and really interesting to see how the space is going to develop. And hopefully we'll catch up further down the line, face to face, at the next Sibos to talk about this. But for now, Ainsley, thank you so much for calling in. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, likewise.